Hi everybody, Yemmax here, and today I want to show you a very simple but effective color grading technique to achieve a greenish thriller-like look. Let's rock the intro! Okay, today I want to show you a very easy but powerful and a professional technique how to achieve a subtle greenish feature film look. It's based on color compensation and offers a very scalable approach. But enough explanations, let's start. Here's my clip already color balanced and exposure corrected in my second node here, and that's as always one of the most important steps to achieve great looking results. The first node is as always reserved for noise reduction, but this shot has only a very slight amount of noise and it's almost only luma noise, so I skipped this noise reduction for now. Now I add 3 serial nodes and drag them a bit further apart. Then I select my 4th node, and the first I want to do is to lower my saturation on this node to around 20 or around 23. Yes, this looks good so far. Now I label this node green and go to my primary swirls. And what I do now needs a bit explanation. As you can see in this parade, the shot is well balanced, and now I drag my lift a slight to the blue, maybe a bit more towards cyan, just to introduce a very subtle bluish touch. Okay, what I've done now is to bring in more blue cyan into the darker parts of the image. What I do now is to compensate this much too bluish touch just by doing the opposite in my gamma. Have a look at my parade. I drag the gamma slightly to yellow, the opposite color of blue, just by bring the blue a bit down again, near to the green, and look at the scopes. The important part on the scopes is this area here. I'm trying to bring the blue down again until it matches with the green, just the same way I would do it if I would color correct my image. Okay, looks good so far. You can see that we introduced a very desaturated and subtle greenish look without pushing any wheels or slider to the green. The trick is to bring in the green in just by pushing the blue and the compensation with yellow. This introduces a slight green into our image, but very subtle and without affecting the colors too much. This trick, or better, this technique, is mostly used to get a great starting point for a subtle greenish thriller-like look. You can see this better if I reset my saturation to 50. If I now turn this node on and off, you can see this effect clearly. Just have a look on the scopes. Okay, let's decrease the saturation again to around 23. Now I got the last node and bring my exposure a bit down, just by lowering my offset a little bit, because I want to bring in a bit more dark feeling. This looks good, and all I have to do to avoid crashing my blacks too much, I increase my lift a bit, just a little bit, to compensate my blacks. This looks good so far. This is, by the way, the usual procedure in color grading. Mostly you have to deal with compensation. If you bring something in, you mostly should compensate this a bit. But that's another story. Okay, this looks good to me. Let's see what we have so far. If I switch these 2 nodes on and off, you can see that we applied a massive change to our image. Okay, let's move on. Now I add a parallel node to my green node and go to my hue versus set curve. Here I choose the red color. and bring in a bit more saturation to the red shades, maybe around 5 till 10%. Looks good. Yes, that's okay for now. Then I add another Zarya node after my parallel mixer node and do the same thing again. Just pushing my red color a bit more in the U versus Z curve, around 7% maybe, just about, but let's bring up the red car a bit more by doing this here in the U versus Luma curve, just selecting the red and pushing it a bit more, just slightly, maybe a bit less saturation in the U versus Z curve. Yes. Yeah, okay, looks good. Now I add another Zarya node and a parallel node and select this upper node. Here I want to bring in some saturation, but first let's switch to the vector scope. Okay. Now I increase the saturation to the max, all the way up. The saturation should stay inside the broadcast range of my vector scope. And if the saturation breaks through this border, just bring the set a bit back until it stays safe inside our broadcast range. Okay. Now select the bottom node, and what I want to do now is to adjust my red a bit more to the orange and the blue shades a bit more to blue. And one way I can do that is just to turn the U value a bit, just a bit, not too much as always, just to bring the red a bit more to life. Let's see what we have so far. If I switch all these nodes on and off, you can see what we've done. Not bad, but I think I go a bit back with my green, just a bit, maybe something like this. Yeah. Now let's introduce a bit more blue into the image. So I add another parallel node to my second stack and select the blue and cyan in my U versus Z curve by using the vector scope for control. And then I add more saturation. This in this area here, this brings a bit more life to my red, and the sky looks a bit more bluish now. That's okay for me. I think this look is not too greenish, but if you want to be more aggressive, for example, with that, you can add more of this greenish look by pushing and pulling the lift and gamma a bit more. Let's do this quickly. Yeah, this maybe a bit more in this direction. Yeah, okay. Good, let's say we are happy so far, but let's bring in a bit more finish. Let's jump back to the parade. And now I just add another Zarya node on front of my look tree, just behind my correction node. And I label this high contrast. What I want to do now is to bring in a bit more contrast, but this time on another way, not using the contrast slider. I will use a custom curve for that. I activate my default anchors and delete this one here. Make sure you have the editable spline selected, and now I push my highlights a bit more up. Just by pushing this little guy here, and with a spline I make a nice roll off, something like this. Yes, this looks good for me. But as I mentioned before, color grading is mostly compensation, so it's a bit too, I guess a bit darker would look better, a bit more dramatic. So let's bring in a bit more darkness just by, of course, lowering my offset a bit more here in my last node. And if I select this high contrast node here and the last node with my offset and switch this two nodes on and off, you can see how much contrast we introduced just by pushing a bit more highlights in our image while we are lowering our exposure with an offset. This technique is sometimes better than using the contrast slider, but as always, it depends on the footage. Anyway, we are almost done. What I want to do now is to check the saturation. I'll do it on this last node here, and just by checking the vector scope. I think I will decrease the saturation a bit more here, just to keep it safe. So, time for the last steps. Let's add another node behind this last node and let's add a glow. By using the open effects, of course, just a subtle one. So increasing the threshold a bit more because I want a bit less effect. Of this effect, I only want to bring the highlights a bit more to polish the image a bit up. This looks fine. Yeah, and now our last step, of course, the final film grain. I add another node for that and add a grain to this node. Okay, let's try the 200T. No, I guess a 400T looks better. Okay, yeah, that's it. But wait. No, I think I would bring in some greenish tint into my highlights. This looks a bit too clean in summary, so let's add another parallel node here in our stack. And this time I choose the lock wheels because I want to adjust the knee a bit. So maybe something like this, just a little bit, so it fits better into the image. Yes, this looks better. Okay. I think we are done now. So again, if I turn all these nodes here on and off, you can see what we've done so far with this very simple technique. We have this kind of greenish, dark, yeah, I call it thriller-like look, just by adding blue and yellow to our image in the shadows and midtones. And that's the reason why I added this greenish tint into the highlights, because the highlights had a bit too much on this magenta. For sure, we could go further. This is not a complete finished look. All through it looks pretty nice so far, but we could do power windows, for example, to bring the cars more up to front and separate them a bit more from the surroundings. But it's up to you to complete this look. And furthermore, you could try to darken the sky a bit more, for example, for a more dramatic feeling, if you want so. But I will stop here in sake of this tutorial, because my intention was to show you this bouncing technique. Anyway, here you can see the before and after. And we are done. And as always, if you want to see more content like this, please don't forget to subscribe and click the bell. Thanks for watching and listening. Stay healthy. You all a great time. Bye.